thanks for joining us. I know it's a nice evening out and there's a lot going on, but we do appreciate a little bit of support here. And for those of you watching at home, we always appreciate you getting in when you can to log on and to watch some things about a pretty important topic, but it's a tough topic. Just to introduce myself, my name is Greta Neff. I am the Health and PE Curriculum Leader here at Downingtown. I've taught in this district for 17 years now. I have also coached here. I also work in Westchester Area School District, so I've been around and I've seen a lot in Chester County over the past 15, 20 years. I've been fortunate enough to work in a lot of our secondary buildings and see kind of the way that kids have changed over the years. And when you think back to the early 2000s, this wasn't really something that was on our radar quite as much. And now all of a sudden it's on our radar all the time. And a lot of that's attributed to just kind of how our society has changed, in particular how our community has changed. So as we sit back and we look at it and we're like, okay, why are we talking about this and what are we doing? The big thing is that we want to make sure that we give our kids and our community members the tools that they need to be able to recognize some signs and symptoms of things not being okay. And then once you recognize those things, then being able to know what to do to move forward. Suicide's a tough topic to talk about, and in particular in our community in the past 3 or 4 years, we've been hit pretty hard. And it's something that we think that if we bring more awareness to it, we can go ahead and do that. So I just want to make sure and remind you, and for those of you at home, this is good for you too, if this gets to be a little much, feel free to take a break. It's one of those things where, if you want to watch 15 minutes and then come back and watch the other 15, it's just too much and it's too close to home, we understand that. Those of you who are here, the bathrooms are out the door to your right, and then make an immediate right. They're right beside the water fountains. Feel free to get up and head out and get some fresh air if you need to do so, as far as that's concerned. Okay? Overall, our goal tonight, as we sat back and thought about it, it was there were 2 things in my mind. One, to explain some of the programming that we're implementing here in Downingtown Area School District, in particular in grades 6 through 12. And then also to kind of figure out, as a parent, how do I support my kids? How do I support my kids' friends, my neighbors, my community members? How do I do that in an appropriate way? Because oftentimes, I think what we find is that if we don't know what to do, we just do nothing because we're afraid of doing something wrong. And that's the last thing that we want to have happen. So as we kind of merge those things together tonight in our agenda, the big thing that we want to talk about is just some basic prevention things for youth suicide and suicide in general and young people. We want to talk about the acronym of Acknowledge, Care, and Tell, which is what we are teaching our kids in our schools. Acknowledge that there's a problem, see it, know the signs and symptoms, tell the person that you care about them, and then find a trusted adult to tell. And so we go through those steps, and I'll walk you through those tonight. And then we're also going to talk about what to do when your child or your student or your community member comes and acts and tells you about it. You are their trusted adult. How do you handle that? Because that can be scary, especially if it's somebody whom you're close with. I want to talk a little bit about coping skills because I think that's one of the biggest things. If we can prevent people from getting to that elevated state, that's always huge. And then some resources. Our community is great, especially here in Chester County. We have a ton of resources that are out there, and being able to access those is something that's really important. So as I go through, if I'm going too fast, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hands or just let me know. You don't really need to raise your hand, you can just talk. That's all fair, all well and good. But like I said, it can be a challenging topic, and we just want to make sure that we know that there are resources out there. And so I'll put these back up at the end. These resources were also sent out via the email, and I believe linked on several different links on our district homepage. You can also Google this at any point in time. You'll see them in our buildings, in the bathroom stalls, in the hallways. The thing that we want to make sure our kids know is that the crisis text line is there. A lot of times it's easier to text about it than it is to talk about it. Those are 3 pretty easy numbers to remember. We just back them up next to each other. I always find it funny, and I talk to my students about how there was a song, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 ago, that actually had this. That was like the title of the song, 1-800-273-TALK. Which I think is really interesting because you put anything to music and you can remember it. So remember, there's always help available, and although these are national lines, we do have some local places that are there too. All right. So as we move through, it's a question of why is suicide hard to talk about, right? Everybody's been touched in some way, shape, or form by tragedy, whether it's been hurricanes, whether it's been deaths in the family, whether it's been suicide. And a lot of times it can be really hard to talk about. I know people who have not even understood or known that their family members have died by suicide until way later in their life because the families hid it so much. And I think a lot of that has to do with the mental health stigma that we've developed here in our community and in the country in general. And as we work to chip away at that, it's really important that we do the work to continue making sure that our kids know that mental health is just as important as our physical health. We have to take care of it the same way we would take care of a broken bone, or a bloody nose. Okay? We've got to put some time and effort into it, and we have to continue with that. So I invited one of my closest friends here, and I forget her name, to talk a little bit about why it can be so hard to talk about this.
I think that why often for parents it is hard to say that my child has been thinking about hurting themselves. My child has said they've wanted to die. I'm worried that my child thinks like this. Is because, you know, from my experience, I've had thoughts early on. My daughter was 7 when she first talked about wanting to take her life. And for me, immediately what I thought was, what must that mean about me as a mom if my child wants to leave this world? Right? Like what kind of parent has a child that wants to die? You know, what have I done wrong? What have I missed? And in my experience, and I frankly, you know, I don't have the answers to what have I missed or what did I do wrong, because in my experience, and now parenting children that have not had some of the struggles of my older child, in my experience, there was never one thing, you know. There was never one thing, there was never one sign I missed, there was never going to be one thing that was going to make it that she didn't have to go through this hard time. And I think we are just hardwired biologically as parents to save our children from pain, from going through a hard time. And in my experience in this journey, I wish and I want my daughter to have never have had those thoughts and feelings, but in my experience, she is one of the strongest women I've ever met at age 25. She is thriving, she has a 3-year-old son, who she's doing a fantastic job caring for. And you know, also for us, we were sort of fell into that group where there was the periodic revisiting during hard times of these hard thoughts, right? So she'd be going through a major transition, or there would be difficulty with the peer group. And unfortunately, there was a combination for her of both this organic sort of things that she dealt with, right? So the brain chemistry, where she was going to be more prone to depression and anxiety. There were some social factors that played for her as well. She was just a kiddo that was just going to internalize pressure and put pressure upon herself, despite everything I did. And so what would happen for her is that during different stages in her childhood, she would experience these thoughts about wanting to take her life, or wanting to not be alive anymore, or just not being able to imagine how to be alive and not feel as terribly as she felt, right? Because that's often what her experience was.
And so we think about that and we're like, man, that is some scary stuff, right? Like the last thing that anybody ever wants to sit and think about is, my God, my child or my person whom I care about comes to me and says, I don't want to be here anymore. And I think it's so easy for us to immediately turn the lens on us and say, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong and how can I fix it, right? So if I'm, wiring some wires and it doesn't work, what did I do wrong? How can I fix it? It's not that easy. And we know the human body isn't that easy, let alone the human brain and the way that emotions and everything work. And there's so many factors that play into it. There's not one thing that you've done right or wrong. And it's not necessarily you, it's not the parent, it's everybody. But I think what we need to focus on is not what has happened or what has led to this necessarily in the moment, but how do we move forward from it? There are certainly things that you can look back upon and you can be like, okay, so how do we try to help these children? How do we try to make sure that they're safe? So when you sit back and you look at it and you talk to these kids who are going through this, they'll say things like, I just hurt, I'm just sad, I don't know what to do. And a lot of times that has to do with untreated depression. It's untreated depression because they don't know where they're at. It's untreated depression because we don't know when to go get help. We don't know where that line is. Because we don't talk often enough about it. It's just like, oh, well, what's wrong with me? It's a me thing. Okay? And I'm scared to walk down to my counselor's office. I'm scared to talk to my family members about it because I don't want to upset them, or because it looks like it's a sign of weakness. And so as we attack this, we talk about getting help as being a sign of strength. We had counselor lessons all week here in the middle school and across our district, where our counseling staff came in and talked to the kids about, hey, here's who we are. We're here to help. It's really good for you to get into our offices, and we should know you, and we're here. And whether your problem feels big or small at the moment, we can help you out. And so that's a really big piece of it, of getting those kids to be able to recognize those signs and symptoms. And what's the difference? What's the difference between, oh, I'm sad today, or, oh, man, this has lasted a really long time. How do I need to go get help for that? And kind of reducing that stigma is a big piece of it. We also know that one of the big signs that we see is drinking and drug use, so drugs, alcohol, tobacco, those types of things, any type of risky behavior. Those are really, things that kids do because they don't feel like they have any kind of consequences, but a lot of times we see them using those to cope with pain. And we know that's not a healthy coping method. So that's a big sign. If we see kids isolating or withdrawing, it's because they're not feeling like they belong anymore, or they just don't want people to notice them. And a lot of times you'll hear kids say, well, I just want to pull away so that people don't notice when I'm gone. Those are things that we will call clues, right? Those are red flags that things are not good and that we need to help. Scary thing to hear is that people don't have hope, right? And so we listen to, people talk about cancer, and I always have hope. As long as there's one more treatment, I have hope. And so mental health and suicide and treatment for depression and everything, it's got to have that same thing, right? There's always hope. We can get better. People can get treatment. People can get better, and we know how to do that, and we can work together to do that. So instilling that reminder that there is hope out there is a really good thing. We also know that access to means that have very quick and permanent reactions is really scary. I think about the amount of impulsive behaviors that the children do in this building every day as 7th and 8th graders. Everything from throwing a pencil down the stairs to, pulling somebody's chair out from underneath them. And so you start talking about what are the big term consequences of that. They don't look down the road as we do as adults. And so when they're making those quick decisions, if they have access to those permanent means, that definitely does not help at all either. And then overall, once they start to get to that point where they're having thoughts of suicide, having a trusted person that they can confide in and talk about those things is really, really important, and really important for us to be aware of. And so when we think about it overall, that's what this program is supposed to do, because, the sad part about it is it's oftentimes as adults, we're not the first ones to know, right? The kids don't come and they don't tell me things. As a coach, I often say to my players, I'll say to my captains, well, I'm always a week behind. So when's the drama going to happen? Is the drama starting now? Because next week you'll tell me this has been going on for 2 weeks, I'm always a week behind because you guys always brew all the drama here, and then you come tell coach when things get really tough. I think with kids, a lot of times that happens too, just in general, because it's really a lot like, man, I don't want to bother anybody with this. Or I don't want to go with them because then I have consequences. And what we have to do is we have to make sure that our kids know that consequences aren't something that come from talking about your mental health. Help comes, okay? Partnership, togetherness, okay? Working towards a goal. Consequences are negative things. This isn't something that we want to make negative. So that's a lot about what this program does. Now, one of the things that the program does is it has a really awesome parent portal, which I'll give you the link to later on this evening. Okay? But if I click on this video real quick, the parent portal is pretty awesome. The entire parent portal is going to go through things. It has a couple videos here to watch about just youth depression and suicide. And then it also gives us trailers and a quick little informational videos about what we're actually doing in the classroom, what the program is, and how the program works to hopefully help reduce any of these suicidal thoughts or ideations or behaviors that we're seeing in our students. The cool part about this website is it also has a lot of information about spotting the signs and what do you need to look for. It has different types of screenings, so you can go through, and I believe it's about 11 questions. So if you're worried about somebody that you care about, you can go take that little brief screen for adolescent depression, and it'll give you some information to move forward, like, hey, things seem to be okay, but you're getting kind of close as to where you might need to go somebody, or red flags, you need to call somebody now, which I think is really cool. And then it also gives you a little bit of a way to talk to your child, and I think that's really important too, because sometimes, like I said earlier, I don't know what to say, so I say nothing, and that can be the worst thing that we do. All right? So as we look at overall, how do we make a difference? And traditionally, fixing problems, it's not rocket science. And so I was listening to a town hall one day. I think I was actually watching PBS for once in my life. And President Obama was speaking. He was actually speaking about gun rights. And it really caught my attention because he stood there and he said, the problem with gun rights and with the NRA is that they never let us look into anything. As soon as we say we want to look into gun laws and gun rights, they're like, no, you can't touch it, don't look at it. He said, but then you look at what we did to make things safer for the roads. And so you look at it and you say, okay, well, back in the early 60s and 70s, people were dying in car accidents. Why were they dying in car accidents? Well, they were dying because turns were too sharp. They were dying because there weren't guardrails, there weren't lines, there were no speed limits, we didn't have seat belts. And so they're looking at it and they're like, wow, people are really dying. And so they did a huge study on it, and based on that study, they made changes, right? They made changes, and as you can see, in the past 15 years, look at that line. It has drastically dropped. We have way less people dying in car accidents now than what we did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so he said, if we just take that model and extrapolate it out to other things that are making our kids not safe, making our community not safe, how much can we help them? And so that's really what we're trying to do here in Downingtown, is really kind of get an idea as to why is this line still staying steady? Now, thank God it's not going up too drastically, but I don't even want to think about that. I don't need for it to go up in order for me to take a look at it and say, 8's still too many. Okay? Anything above a 0 is too many there. And so that's something that we need to take a look at. And that statistic there is really staggering. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in teenagers in the United States. Okay? And we know that as a community because we've been hit hard. And so we've got to take this and we've got to say, okay, how can we help our friends, our families, our communities, our students? How can we play a role in keeping them safe? Well, it's very simple. Okay? Normalize the idea that we can get depression treated. If you're not feeling okay, normalize it. Come talk to me. Go talk to your friends' parents, for crying out loud. Go talk to your counselors. Go see somebody. Talk to them. Find help. It's okay. All right? We also can make it normal by saying, look, I have depression, or hey, I know somebody who's going through that, or hey, this is what a lot of people do. And the more that we talk about it, the less that stigma is there, and the more that the kids will get help, which is what we want, to be able to support them. We also know that we have to build in protective factors and habits. Once kids feel connected to something, they feel a purpose, and that's huge. That's not rocket science. You can see that as soon as the kids, get to be of the age of being being play age. They want to be involved in the group. They want to be involved with their siblings, their cousins, those types of things. Kids like to be connected. And so the more that we can develop healthy habits and coping skills, the better that we can be. That connection to peers and trusted adults becomes really huge as kids begin to explore things and get a lot of their own responsibility. And so as kids move up through 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they get that responsibility of their own phone. They eventually take their driver's test. They get to go and drive. And, we've got to put things in place as to where they are connected to healthy things. So they're not sitting there with idle hands thinking, how can I go get in trouble? Because trouble isn't the same as it used to be years and years and years ago. At length in our health classes, we were talking about coping skills. And I know our counseling staff is doing the same, all the way from grades K through 12. We talk about healthy ways to deal with your depression, your sadness, your anxiety. What's the difference between stress and anxiety? One is okay, one is not. One prohibits you from doing things, the other one can make you do things better. How do we harness those, and how do we deal with those in a healthy way? I always tell my students I used to eat a lot of ice cream to deal with my anxiety and my habits and my issues. That's not a healthy coping skill, right? What's better? Going out for a jog, sitting and drawing, calling your friends and talking to them. What are some healthy ways that work for you individually to get through these tough times? Because tough times are going to happen. And I think kids need to remember that too. Things are going to be hard. Kids sit there all the time and they're like, I can't wait to grow up. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, hold on, because once you get bigger, you get bigger problems, right? Little kids, little problems, grown-ups, grown-up problems. And so as they get older, they have to understand things aren't going to be easy, and I'm going to have problems. How do I get through those? And then if we can decrease the access to guns and other violent means and very quick permanent means, that can always be good. And like I said, just making kids feel like there's hope. And things are tough now, but things can get better. And in being able to instill that resiliency in kids is really, really important. So we take a look at it and we say, okay, so we understand we've got to do something about this. And so as a school district, we have, over the past 2 or 3 years, started to implement this program called Signs of Suicide. It is an evidence-based program, and it's something that seems to be really good. From a curricular standpoint, it's a super easy implementation. It's 1 class period, so it's 45 minutes. It's a guided discussion lesson. There are really good videos that walk kids through some real-life scenarios. Okay? And it's something that empowers our youth. It takes a 6th grade kid and says, you know what, you have the power to save your friend's life. Just the same as when I go over to Marsh Creek and I sit there and I talk about Aiden's heart training, and I talk about how we need to use AEDs and how we do CPR and how we recognize an emergency. This is the same thing. Okay? Just because recognizing an emergency when somebody collapses is a physical thing, this is recognizing an emergency when somebody is in a mental or emotional state of distress, just the same as physical. And so as we look at signs of suicide, we talk to them in a very real way. We talk to them in a way that's very age appropriate. Hey, it's not hard. Okay? It's not hard. All you got to do is follow a couple things. Okay? The statistics there speak for themselves. And I believe the overall statistic is about 64% decrease in suicidal ideation and attempts in kids who have delivered and kids who have received this education. So it's kind of a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. And so what do we tell the kids to do? Well, it's pretty easy. We acknowledge the signs of depression. And we acknowledge that they're there. We talk about it. We call our friends out. Hey, I see you doing this. Okay? I don't like it. And then I show them that I care about them. Okay? Which is sometimes a little bit harder than it may seem for kids, but it doesn't have to be. And we explain to them how to do that. And then we talk about who those trusted adults are. How do we go get help? How do we go access help? And so when you acknowledge the warning signs overall, you're talking about things like anger, and extreme anger and very quickly. Yeah, right? Sometimes people get angry and it's totally justified. Anger is a really healthy emotion. Okay? But why are we getting angry? Are we getting angry at little things? Are we getting angry at things that we normally wouldn't get angry about? Do we have less patience? Do we have big changes in our behavior? So all of a sudden, instead of posting on Snapchat every day and every 5 minutes, now I haven't posted on Snapchat in a while. That's different. Hey, this person hasn't put any TikToks up in a while. That's different. We're looking for overall big changes in behaviors. Okay? Any signs that they feel hopeless. Well, I don't know why I would do my homework anyways. It's not like I'm ever going to pass 7th grade, or those types of things. When kids are talking about, there's no reason to try to get better. Sleeping more or less can always be tricky. That can be pretty much anything going on in a kid's body. But when we see kids who are taking massive chunks of the day in their room, in their beds, they can't get out of bed, that can be an issue. And also when they're in their rooms and they're up watching Netflix or whatever they're doing and they're having trouble sleeping because of whatever thoughts are going on inside of their head, that can be a clue. As we said, drinking and drug use is definitely a big warning sign, an overwhelming feeling of pain. Okay, so it's not localized in one part of your body. My knee hurts every day, my back hurts every day. It's an overall, I can't really put my finger on it, I just don't feel good. Okay? And then obviously the biggest red flag would be they're talking about suicide. They're looking things up about it. They are trying to find things and glamorize it. Those are all warning signs that we have to teach the kids and we talk to the kids about, listen, these are not normal. And so then it's like, well, okay, I know that's not normal. Got it. What do I do now? Okay? What do I do now? Well, it's not hard to show somebody that you care. And what we try to remind the kids is you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to have an answer. You don't have to have a fix. It's not your job to answer the question. It's not your job to fix your friend. It's not your job to do any of those things. Your job is just to say, hey, I'm here. I care about you. If I was not feeling well and saying these things, you would take me to the counselor. You would take me to coach. You would take me to the principal. You would take me to our neighbor, our parents, whatever it is. You wouldn't let me feel like this. And showing them like, listen, you're valued to me. I really enjoy this. Hey, look, we used to hang out every Friday night. You haven't been to a football game in 3 weeks. What's going on? I miss you. Yeah, I miss you as a friend. And being able to say those things sometimes for kids is a little bit harder because they think it's got to be a grand gesture. It doesn't. Hey, I'm here. I'm here. What do you need? What can I do? And then the biggest thing that we tell the kids is if you are that concerned about one of your friends, don't hesitate to go tell them. You don't have to keep a secret. Okay? There are times where secrets are good, and there are times where you would say to your friend, like, oh, don't worry, I won't tell anybody that Johnny kissed Sally, and he's really dating somebody. Okay, I get that, okay? But when you're talking about the overall safety of somebody, it's not something that we hold. Okay? We go tell, right? And if you can get your friend to go with you to see somebody, that's the best. And so if you're sitting in the cafeteria, you're on the bus, and you try not to leave them alone. You're getting off the bus and your friend's saying, I wish I could just go to bed and never wake up. Hey, I don't really like what you just said. That makes me upset because I really care about you. Can we go talk to my mom about it? Can we go talk to our neighbor about it? Can we go talk to the bus driver about it? Whatever it is. Okay? Don't promise to keep things a secret because that's not their job either. Okay? And we always talk about, and I talk about this a lot with the kids, and I don't know when it hammers home. At some point I hope it does. We always say we'd rather make a friend mad than have somebody that we can't talk to ever again. And that's something that's real. I may lose you as a friend for a couple years, but a couple years later, I bet you're going to come back and you're going to say thank you. Okay? And that's what it's about. It's not about how many friends you have. It's about keeping people safe and keeping the ones that you care about safe. So that's what we're talking about in the classroom. We talk about it in 6th grade. We implemented it in 6th grade about 2 years ago. I think this is our 3rd year of implementing the SOS program in 6th grade over at Marsh Creek. It's been a really big success because it is so easy to implement. We have kids who are opening the dialogue a little bit more between our counseling staff and our prevention specialists, which is what we want. We just began this year implementing it in 7th grade and 8th grade with some follow-up videos and things that are scripted, again, for us to implement in the class. And then we are also implementing it with our standard mental health lessons in 9th grade, as well as in our 10th grade health curriculum. And then when kids are graduating in 12th grade, we're actually going to give them a booster one more time before they leave of this program that they have designed for graduating seniors as they head off into the real world, whether that be college, trade school, or right into the workforce. It's important that we make sure that we give our kids all the tools to succeed here in Downingtown. And that's not just when they're here in our walls and in our buildings. That's when they're out there in the real world, and we want to make sure that we take care of them as best we can. So like I said, they have really good trailers up on the website. If you wanted to view those, you can certainly do that in your own time. But they have age-appropriate things. So you look at this, and you're like, oh yeah, those are two middle school girls. They could very easily be standing here in this library right now talking. And they're talking about, hey, you haven't been to softball practice. Hey, I haven't seen you in music. That's something you really love. Why aren't you doing it now? Okay? And over here, you can see this younger girl. She's saying to her older brother, like, hey, what's going on? Why are you sitting here? You haven't been out of this house in a month. Look at you. You were a disaster. Like, come on, let's call. I'm going to call. Okay? I'm going to call people. I'm going to get you help. And so they go through that in, again, a very age-appropriate way. And we open up the discussion floor. We have a lot of really good, helpful PE teachers here who open up that discussion floor and allow the kids to be able to ask questions. What do I do if? Well, what about this? And we kind of try to walk the kids through it, because the more that they're prepared, the better they can handle things. So we say things like, hey, if you're worried about a friend, you know, and this is from a parent perspective. If your kid comes home and says, man, I'm really worried about my buddy, what do you do? And sometimes that can be really tough, because, you know, there's always that line of like, when do I call my friend's parents and when do I not? When do I just worry about my own child versus the person down the street? But the best thing you can do is really just listen to your kids' concerns and validate that, and encourage them to seek help. And the kids know where to get help in school, and that's something that's really important. You can always feel free to reach out to the person's friends directly. That would be one of those times that you will want to call somebody else and call them and say, hey, listen, you know, I had Johnny over here sleeping over last night, and I really wasn't okay with some of the things I heard him and my kid discussing. You know, I'm concerned. Maybe you want to check in, okay? Contact the school mental health staff. It's been amazing to me. Over the past summer, I saw a lot of friends from college, and their kids are all right around my kids' age, going into middle school, and some of them are having issues, and some of them are having issues with this, and this. I said, well, you should send them to see your school counselor. And they were like, I never thought of that. I was like, we have these people here to help. They're here to help during their school day. Always encourage them to see our mental health staff in all of our buildings, because they are great people who are really here to help us. If you're concerned about the immediate safety, 911 is always available, right? So I'm worried that this kid's going to go do something right now. We can call 911. Hey, the police can come and help out with that. But always assure your child and reassure them that they did the right thing. Okay? You never want a kid to come here and feel bad about it. Just like, you know, if my son's buddies are going to Target instead of going to the Y, and all of a sudden, you know, I say, hey, listen, you know, I'm worried about this. I don't want you to do this. And he's like, well, you know, if I go tell you, or if I go tell Dom's mom, or if I go tell this, or this, or if I go tell Jimmy's this, then I'm going to get in trouble, or he's going to get in trouble, or this is going to happen. And you're like, well, that's actually okay, because you shouldn't worry about that. Are you keeping your friends safe? And that's something that's really important. And so again, help is always available here in our schools, but when we're outside of our school walls, we worry about that too. And like I said, I promised that I would put those numbers back up there again, and I'll have them again one more time later. So the other thing that we have to remember is that when your kids do confide in you, you kind of have to manage your reactions too. And go, oh my gosh, how dare you be thinking those things? That is the last thing that they want to hear. What they want to hear is, okay, let's deal with that. Let's talk about that, let's deal with that, right? And as hard as it is sometimes for us to do that as adults, because immediately we start thinking the worst, right? So, you know, kid comes home and says, I failed my math test. And you're like, oh my gosh, you're going to fail math and you're never going to graduate high school and this. No, that's not what's going to happen. You sit there and say, okay, well, are you going to go see your teacher? Are you going to ask for a retest? Are you going to study harder next time? We have to do the same thing with tough topics, right? And it's not just suicide that we're talking about here. I mean, I'll even put my health teacher hat on. We're talking about any kind of relationship issues. As kids grow older, they come to you with tougher things because they're trying to explore, they're getting out there. And so we have to make sure that we're a safe place because we want them to talk to us. So we've got to remember that we have to be human, we have to be adults, but yet we have to be almost friends with them and say, okay, all right, we're going to take this in stride and we're going to figure it out. I just need to let you know, okay, that I am human and I am worried. You say these things that worries me, it concerns me, and so I'm going to do my best to get you help. I'm going to do the best to work together. Remember that it's okay to be upset about it later, too. It's okay to be upset in the moment. I think a lot of times You know, parents sitting there like, I don't want my kid to see me upset, because then that's going to make them more upset. Maybe it validates it more for them, right? You know, and that's where you have to know your audience. But I do think that that's really important when we're talking to kids about uncomfortable things. It's really uncomfortable for me to talk about this too, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give up. I mean, I'm not going to stop talking about it. So give yourself permission to be human and to walk through things with the kids. And also give yourself permission to be upset about it later. Okay? Confide in somebody else. So find a supportive person, whether that's a partner, whether that's a neighbor, whether that's a family member, a coworker, whomever you have that is your support network, they're there for you too. So feel free to reach out to them and talk to them and be like, man, this happened today. You're going to have to help me walk through this. Or get yourself some help. Okay? Because most importantly, we want to make sure that we know as adults, we also don't have to keep secrets. You know? And I tell my students that all the time. I tell my kids that I coach all the time. I'm like, listen, if you tell me anything that's going to hurt yourself or others, I have to tell somebody else. That's the end of it. And I don't want to hear it. And I'm going to say you're welcome. Because you came to me to tell me something. You know that that's what's going to happen. And you know that's the right thing. And so that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That's why I say we got to move away from the word consequences, right? I walk down the hallway, I trip a teacher, I have consequences, okay? I go into the guidance office and I say, I'm really having a hard day. There aren't consequences there. There are things that we do to help. Okay? And just reframing that conversation can be really important. And trying to find some ways to make sure that our kids are safe. And so when we talk about building protective factors in, what can we do to make sure that our kids are safe? How do we protect them? Like I said before earlier this evening, encourage them to connect with school. Our schools are amazing. I think I saw a list that was like this big of activities and clubs that are being offered at our middle school. I mean, you can have everything from a Minecraft club to baseball to basketball to musical. If your kids find anything interesting, they can find a club to be involved in our schools, because we know that the more that we can make those connections and develop connections with teachers and peers, the better they'll be and the safer they'll be, because they'll be able to be more resilient. We also need to make sure that we let our child know that whenever they're ready to talk, we are here to listen. And so that's got to be undivided attention. So it's got to be, I'm putting my phone down, I'm closing my computer, I'm turning the TV off, I want to listen. Okay? You are important, I care about you, I'm here whenever you're ready. And that may not be at the most opportune time, but it's important that you validate that and let them know that whenever they're ready, you're there for them. They don't have to be alone. They don't have to be alone. So some of the coping skills that we talk about in health class are things that help us through hard times. So simple things like exercise, taking a walk. It doesn't have to be a run. You don't have to go run Broad Street this weekend. You have to just be able to exercise. We know exercise brings about endorphins. Oftentimes people exercise outside, which is really good for us too in our body. So those things just in general can be helpful. Sometimes people don't like to exercise, and I get it. I hate it a lot of days too. But writing things down. An exercise that I did earlier this year with my volleyball team is I pulled all of my kids aside and I said, okay, here's a piece of paper for all of you. And one looked at it, okay, coach, what are we going to do? You're going to serve a ball to it? I was like, no, you're all going to go get something and you're going to write on that piece of paper. And they were like, oh, okay, are we setting goals? And I was like, no. You're going to pick somebody in your life who has done something nice for you in the past month. Whether that's a parent who has driven you to practice, whether it was somebody who gave you a compliment, whether it was somebody who made your bed or made you dinner, whatever it is, I want you to pick one person. And I want you to write a thank you. That's it. And then you're going to fold it up and you're going to give it to them. They said, do we have to? I said, yes, you have to. So because it's important that you feel good. And it's important that you feel good about yourself. And I guarantee you, whomever you give that letter to, they will feel good and that will make you feel good in turn. And so the next day I followed up and I said, how many of you actually gave your notes out in true high school kid fashion? Only 7 out of the 12 had actually given the note to somebody. And the one girl raised her hand and she said, Coach, I gave mine to my mom and she cried and hugged me. And I was like, how'd that feel? She said, it was amazing. I said, that's right. Do you feel better now? She was like, yeah, I do. And I said, see how simple that is? Okay, writing down things that you're thankful for, that you're grateful for, showing that gratitude to somebody else, paying that forward, can make people infinitely feel better. And so we talk about that in class here in Downingtown. We talk about how to make sure that we're working on making sure that we feel good by helping others to feel good. We talk about appropriately talking to friends and family and how to connect. What's a healthy amount of social media time to connect with our friends versus what's unhealthy. We talk about how to make sure that we organize time to get together face to face, especially now after the pandemic. And we talk about things like listen to music, art, drawing, binging on Netflix, cooking, those types of things. Those are all really good things that people can do. And so the big thing that we ask is, what's your person's favorite thing to do to cope, right? Because like I know, hey, my kids are different. And so if I went home and I was like, hey, you're having a rough day, why don't you go run a mile? One of my children is going to look at me and say, yes. And the other one's going to be like, are you kidding me? Do you want to make my day worse? But I can look at him and say, hey, do you want to make some Rice Krispie treats with me? And he'll feel infinitely better. So you got to know your kids. You got to know your audience. What is their favorite thing to do to help them feel better and to feel a little bit less anxious and a little bit less anxiety? And those are all good things that we can do as far as protective factors. One of the things that the website does also is it gives us a lot of ways to talk to teens. I think sometimes I'm very lucky and I'm very blessed that I've been working with kids for as long as I have. That it kind of just is something that happens, whether I'm good or bad at it, I don't know, but it's something that just happens. But it's also really important to point out to people, yes and no questions are conversation enders. Okay? Open-ended questions are conversation starters. So things like, how was your day? Good. Simple answer. Okay? Tell me something good that happened today. Okay, tell me something bad that happened today. My lunch, it was terrible. This girl sat next to me and I couldn't stand. You know, they'll talk. And so as they open up and start to talk a little bit, you can get a little bit of an inside problem or insight to what's going on in their heads. Just that start is really, really good. And remember, we don't have to solve their problems. A lot of times kids come to us just because they want to complain. I give my parents a lot of credit because they used to listen to me after all of my sporting events. I'd come home and I'd complain about the coach or about my teammates, and they'd say, okay, you're done now. What are you going to do about it, right? They weren't going to fix the problem right away. They let me have my time, which I thought was really respectful. And they said, okay, well, what do you think is going to help, right? Empowering our kids to be problem solvers. It's really, really important. And then make sure that your child always knows that you're available, all right? I know things are tough right now. I'm around later. I'll be here. I'm here whenever you are. I laugh at my mom. She used to have a chair in her, well, she actually still does, in her bedroom. She had like a chair there, a recliner. That was where everybody went to spill our guts. And it was oftentimes at like 11 o'clock at night. She would be laying in bed and he'd creep over and say, are you awake? You're like, come on in. And we would just dump it all. It was dark, it was safe, but it was something that we knew. And that's something that I wanted to try to build for my kids. But it was something that she always gave us that feeling of she was always around to talk. And so if we can do little simple things like that in our lives and make those simple adjustments, that can be really helpful. I'm not going to say that we have all the answers here, but as you start to think about it and kind of open it up and start to think outside the box, ways to give your teens and your kids and your family members safe places to talk is really, really important. Some of the things up here that I really love that I think are great, playing games in my family is a great way to get the kids to talk because all of a sudden there's instant trash talk going back and forth. And then you'll listen for little tidbits and you can kind of hear what's going on in their day. I can find out a little bit more about them. We have more to connect on. Watching TV shows together. If your kids want to binge Netflix, that's fine. Let's binge Netflix together. No matter how much I may like or hate the show, I have watched way too much anime at this point in my life. But it's a way that we can connect, right? We want to continue to keep those connections because when things get hard, the more that we have those connections, the more likely they are to talk to us. Okay? And then the other thing that I think is really important there is to make sure that, you know, it doesn't have to be one really big, huge talk. It can be little things here and there and everywhere. Okay? And we have other people that we can gather information from too. Okay? Whether it's running across the street to a neighbor's house, talking to somebody else's friend's parents, whether it's talking to an aunt, an uncle, talking to teachers at school. We have a network of safety built around who can break through to kids who are a little bit safer for them to talk to when they're worried about their parents or they're worried about what's going to go on. The other thing that we want to dispel tonight is that if you ask about suicide, it's not going to put the idea in somebody's head. So if you're worried about somebody, don't beat around the bush and say, oh man, do you wish you would go to bed and not wake up? Do you wish you were dead? Like, just come out and say it. That's hard. And as somebody who's had to do that with a couple of my athletes, I can tell you it's really hard. The amount of stuff that I've gone through as far as my schooling and my education, and I still struggle to look at a kid whom I care about and I've coached for years and say, hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? That was hard. No, coach, I'm not there. Okay. Or, yeah, coach, I'm kind of there. Okay, now we need to go do some things. But we've got to make sure that we ask that questions because that's not what's going to put the idea in somebody's head. So being able to have those open conversations to begin with is what's really going to move us to be able to have a safer place to discuss all of this. And so again, just to remind you, these are the things that we are asking our kids to do, so it's really great if you guys can model these things at home too, because the more that we have it built in for the kids, the more likely they are to be able to do it and do it right and do well. look out for those warning signs and make sure that you seek help immediately. Don't hide things. Don't hold those secrets. Make sure that you pay attention. Make sure that we build coping skills and we have positive supports for our kids. And then also talk to your kids about suicide and be ready to listen, because that's what's really important, and those are the connections that we really have to make. As I promised, the Signs of Suicide parent page is up there, and we will put this on a link. If your children do not already have it, it was definitely sent home in the letter that came from the principals. On that website, there are video clips and things about the programs in particular that are in the class, so specific to the grade level that you're going to be talking about and your kids are going to be in. It also has that screening for adolescents, so if you're worried about somebody and you're not sure what to do, you can certainly go through that. It's anonymous and it's pretty simple, but it's good and it's helpful. And they also have good resources up there too for you. Okay? Fantastic to remember, and this should have been attached to your email that came home too from your principal. We'll print these out after we're done teaching the lessons in all of our buildings, and we'll put these up all through our hallways just to remind kids to act, right? If you see something that's not right, you got to act about it. You got to acknowledge it, and you got to tell somebody about it. You got to show somebody that you care, and that's what's really important. So, if you're seeing any of these things that look alarming, at this point, we should certainly know what to do. Do you guys have any questions for me? Fantastic. As I said, those numbers are up there. If you want to take a picture of it with your phone or something like that, you are more than welcome to do so. Those of you at home can certainly take a screenshot or Google any of this stuff. Thanks so much for coming out tonight.